What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are uploading this kind of late because I just got back from Disney World. Had an amazing trip. It was awesome. I'll probably have a video about it on my vlogging channel. But we are covering The Batman Who Laughs Part 3. And in the last video, we basically picked up with essentially the return of James Gordon Jr. Now, James Gordon Jr. is the son of Commissioner Gordon, of James Gordon, and of course the brother of Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. But the cool thing about James Gordon Jr. is that imagine the Joker if he was rational, which I know kind of takes away from the premise of like a psychopath. But when it comes to James Gordon Jr., he's one of these guys where all he did was like think and plan ways to like wipe out people, destroy things, cause as much like, pandemonium and chaos as he possibly could. And so because of that, of course, he was basically in prison, and of course he was put in a program where it was basically a drug that was produced by Wayne Pharmaceuticals that could essentially cure a person who was a psychopath. And if I remember correctly from Batman Eternal and from Forever Evil, the idea was to test the drug on James Gordon Jr. to see if it would work on like the Joker or somebody like that. So he was kind of a test subject more or less. But for the most part, it's been working. Like he takes 2 shots a day, like tests his blood, to make sure that everything's still in effect and so on and so forth. It gets kind of nuts in terms of how he lives his life, but it's super, super strict to make sure he doesn't go back to doing what he was doing before. But the idea behind this is, for those of you guys who are catching up, the idea behind this was that the Joker, when he was taken prisoner by Batman, or really kind of brought in by Batman and then so on, everything kind of unfolded, is that James Gordon Jr. is the key to stopping the Batman Who Laughs. And we didn't really know how far this key extended, right? Like we didn't really know what doors it unlocked, but that's essentially what this kind of does. When you have James Gordon meeting with his son, it's really kind of Scott Snyder giving us this refresher and saying, here's what James has been doing. But then of course the group is met with the arrival of Batman. And this is when things get kind of cool, because what Bruce says on a normal circumstance, when Bruce Wayne approaches someone like this, he wants them for a particular purpose, but he wants to make sure that things stay on the up and up. When he approaches James Gordon Jr., what he says is, I don't want the version that's doing what he's supposed to do. Like, I don't want the one who's a good guy. I want the murderer. Like I want the murderer, the killer, the crazy psychopath. That's the version that I want. And the whole idea behind this is, as Batman explains, is that the Batman Who Laughs is implementing a plan to essentially like destroy Gotham. Now, we don't know exactly what this plan is in its entirety. We just know like the Batman Who Laughs wants to unleash pandemonium and chaos. And the way that Snyder plays this out is it looks like it'll be something that's far more extreme than like Batman Endgame. For those of you guys who never read Batman Endgame, what we ended up finding out was the Joker had this plan to essentially release Joker toxin across the entire city of Gotham and to send the city into like mass hysteria and into like, chaos and panic and so on and so forth. And it worked. He actually did it. Like it was kind of nuts the way it all played out. But of course, with Batman using the last laugh plan, which was essentially using like the tunnels of Gotham to essentially pump out like a cure to the Joker toxin, where all that's kind of out the window now. The idea is to know what the Batman Who Laughs plan is going to be. And because James Gordon Jr. is a legitimate psychopath who spent a majority of his life just like analyzing and trying to find ways to destroy things, he's the best person to go to, because right now they can't get answers from the Joker. And so it's kind of cool, because what this is an act of desperation. While James Gordon Jr. is a psychopath, he's not exactly like the Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is a combination of the Joker and Batman. It's an answer to the question, what would happen if Batman became the Joker? And so the best person to go to is the Joker, but the Joker's not spilling the beans. He's not giving any real answer. And the only answer he did give is go find James Gordon Jr. He's the answer you're looking for. And so that's literally why Batman's following these breadcrumbs and following these directions, is because he doesn't really have a choice here. It's kind of funny because James Gordon Jr. does not want to do any of this stuff. James Gordon Jr. is like, I don't want to do this. Like, I do not want to jump into this scenario again. I don't want to go back to being that version of myself. So he's very much against the idea, which really kind of ties Batman's hands. And so when they try to reason with him and they say like, put down the scanner and like talk to us, he says like, I'm not the one with this red dot, meaning somebody's targeting them. And that's when like all hell starts to break loose, because of course the group is met by the arrival of what's basically Punisher Batman. And this is cool because Punisher Batman and like Batman himself actually face off against each other. It's basically a guy who's shooting to kill versus a guy who's not. And they're able to like dodge the attacks of each other. So for the most part, it's a stalemate insofar as one of them kind of gets the upper hand. Batman kind of gets the upper hand on Punisher Batman, but not really. And the reason why is because where Punisher Batman's kind of caught unawares with like a grappling hook and basically kind of left dangling over a bridge and whatnot, you end up having him basically like bring in all these different vehicles and so on, and then say like, there's a jet flying above us, and if you do not give me James Gordon, I'm going to destroy the jet. I'm going to destroy one of its engines. And this is cool because what this does is it again hints at the idea and really kind of points to the idea of how capable this evil alternate reality version of Batman is. That in his universe, there are no villains. There's no Joker, no Scarecrow, no Penguin, no Two-Face, no nothing. He's killed them all. That he has basically gone through and like essentially essentially like controls the entire city of Gotham, right? Even hits it like, hints home at what he calls the colony. And so that's really kind of Scott Snyder basically bringing in the idea of like Tom King and James Tynion's Batman run, or Batman Detective Comics run, when you have the colony, right? Like this organization that essentially kind of took over, kind of a paramilitary group, the father of Batwoman, who wanted to take over Gotham City, and then like basically weaponized Batman's technology to essentially control the city of Gotham. And then in alternate reality, this Punisher Batman's done that. And so being that capable, he's basically began colonizing Gotham City in like the main DC universe by basically saying like, I know everything that's going on everywhere, or at least, I'm getting to the point where I am. And so him basically saying like, if you don't do what I tell you to, then I'm going to take out this plane, 72 people are going to die, 41 of them are Gothamites, I'm going to kill them all you have to do is give me Commissioner Gordon and it all goes away. And where Gordon is kind of like, where he believes that it's his son that he's talking about, the response of Batman is, it's not the son, it's you. And he literally knocks out Commissioner Gordon and hands him over to like Punisher Batman. And the idea behind this, at least, in terms of why this is being done, is Batman says that when it came to like the whole last laugh device that he had, the device that would serve the purpose of like allowing a cure to be implemented throughout the city of Gotham, required like a 2-point activation. It required Batman and someone he trusted, the only other person he really trusts being Commissioner Gordon. Now, switching over to the Iceberg Lounge to Penguin, it's kind of cool here because of course the Batman Who Laughs basically busts in and starts torching the place, literally using the various weapons and gimmicks of the Joker, of Penguin, to start tearing everything up and start letting everything, setting everything on fire. Now, some of the gimmicks that really seem to be brought here by Batman Who Laughs seem to be gimmicks from his own universe, which is to say, like one of the I guess, an umbrella of the Penguin that can shoot alcohol, which in turn, if given a flame, can set everything on fire. Just small little things like that are really interesting and really, really smart for him to use in this scenario by literally taking out all the forces of Penguin and then bringing in another version of Bruce Wayne. And in this alternate reality version of Bruce, this is a version that actually tried to reason with the Penguin, that tried to like work alongside the Penguin and actually became a criminal lord himself, and then rose to power and gained more power than the Penguin did. And then the tables turned, so that when Penguin was basically losing all of his clout, all of his power, and all of his money, he tried to reason with this version of Bruce, but was always pushed out. So this version of Bruce Wayne is basically a mob boss. And it's kind of cool to see, like he's dark, he's sinister, and it's interesting to see that happen because of course the Batman Who Laughs kills that version of Bruce and then tells Penguin, if what you're looking for is the person who basically set all this in motion, a person who seems to be like skewing your dice to where it's taking away the effect of like the house rigging the games and so on and so forth, then go talk to one of your guys named Matches Malone. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Matches Malone is the criminal underworld identity of Bruce Wayne. He uses the name Matches Malone to infiltrate the criminal underworld, so no one really knows that he's actually Bruce Wayne. It's a long-standing secret identity. It's one of those little Easter eggs and hallmarks that fans love seeing brought up all over the place, but it's a cool little thing here because what Batman Who Laughs does is basically send Penguin on the trail of Matches Malone. Now, that probably won't come to fruition for quite some time, but what it does mean is that somewhere later on around the corner, presumably when Scott Snyder starts writing into other Batman stories and so on, the Penguin will start looking for Matches Malone, all the while totally unaware of the fact that he's basically tracking down Batman and just not knowing it. So it's kind of cool here because what ends up happening is that when Batman basically gets James Gordon Jr. back to the waterways and says, hey, look, I need you to look at everything here and use your psychopathic, intelligent mind to figure out what's the best way to spread some toxin around Gotham and like destroy the entire city. James Gordon Jr. initially begins to kind of bend and say, okay, but then he asks a question. He says, like, tell me one thing. Did Joker get to you? Did the Joker get to you and Joker infect you? Because if he did, that's the key to the plan. There's nothing I can really do here. If anything, I'm like a stopgap measure. I can't really do a whole lot of things here. Like there's not a whole lot that I can offer in this scenario. I mean, he does what he can, but like that's really it. But in the middle of it all, suddenly like Alfred pops up. The Batcave has basically been trashed. The Joker's literally like he's got his heart, like his chest is open. He's got his heart sitting there. He's been writing ha 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 in blood all over the place. Like it's absolutely bonkers. And so what ends up happening is like when the question is asked by James Gordon Jr., what do we do next? Batman says, we do the only thing we can do. The one thing that we should have been doing the entire time, the one thing the Joker told me to do at the beginning of all this, the one thing everybody's been telling me all this time, the one thing that I was supposed to do this whole time and never really wanted to do in the first place. And so what ends up happening here is that when Alfred finally makes his way back to the Batcave and then finding out that he cannot access the proper location and then has to go to like one of the exterior entrances, when he gets down there, we end up finding out that what Batman's done is removed all the toxin blocks from his body and totally given in to like the Joker serum. This is the only plan that I have. I have to become the Batman Who Laughs. I have to become this version of the character in order to be able to defeat him. Crazy. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.